Hey everybody, good afternoon or good morning if you're on the West Coast. It's John Sottery. Doing my first Facebook Live video. I've been on Facebook since January 4th, in fact. So first thing I wanted to touch upon is had a great time with everybody out in San Diego at Brendan's Mastermind. I thought it was an amazing couple of days. Loved all the folks that I met. I love the energy. I love the passion. And I know you guys are going for it. And it's just awesome to be part of a team like that. And I thought, Brendan just hit it out of the park. It was great. So I feel very blessed that I'm on the, part of that team. Sorry, you guys, I'm not used to reading stuff on the screen that's coming up when I'm talking, so I'll work on that. So today, what I wanted to talk to you about is a subject which I'm sure you bring it up at every cocktail party. You talk to your friends about it all the time. It's really one of those things you're always talking about. But the subject is melanoma, and how do you avoid dying from melanoma? Because melanoma has really exploded over the last, let's say, 30 to 40 years. In fact, some of the data suggests that melanoma has gone up 300% since the 1970s. I always try to put something into a picture, and the picture that I have in my mind is if you're going to watch the Super Bowl in a couple weeks, that stadium holds about 72,000 people. Unfortunately, the stadium's not big enough to hold all the people that are going to get diagnosed with melanoma over the next 365 days. So it's 76,000 people will get diagnosed with melanoma over this next year, and 10,000 of those people are going to die. And so now melanoma is a strange animal. I've been following it for 30 years. The interesting thing about melanoma is, you think melanoma, it's caused by the sun. So if you worked outdoors, if you're an outdoor worker, you would expect to have high levels of melanoma. And if you're in, oh, Sean is saying, is your mic on? Let's see here. Anybody else? Are you guys getting sound? Can you let me know? If you're not getting sound, put a comment up, because someone's telling me that they're not getting sound. So let me know if you can't hear me. Please send me a message on that. If that's the case, that's not so good. Sound is good. Okay, good. We're all set. Thanks. It must have been a problem on their system. Appreciate it, Chris. Thanks. So basically, you couldn't fit all those people in the stadium. Now, the strange thing about melanoma is that everyone thinks of melanoma being caused by the sun, and that is true. However, outdoor workers actually have a lower rate of melanoma versus indoor workers, and that's something that's always been quite strange. Secondly, you can actually get melanoma on the palms of your hands. You can get it on the soles of your feet. Now, the three skin cancers, basal cell carcinoma, squamous cell carcinomas, and melanomas. Melanomas are the least common, but they kill the majority of the people that die of skin cancer. So they're the most dangerous. So the first thing on melanoma is if you were exposed years ago, you develop a melanoma. I always think you need a good metaphor to understand how to look at something so you know how to handle it. And the metaphor that I came up with, it's a little aggressive, but I think it gets the point across, and that is, if somebody wrapped up a hand grenade with some Velcro and stuck it on your back and pulled the pin, would you basically sit around and say, well, maybe it's nothing, maybe I don't need to worry about it, it's probably no big deal? Or would you do everything in your power to get it off of you and get it as far away as possible? Because that's really how you have to look at melanomas, because when the melanomas are at a very early stage, they're almost 100% curable. They basically take it off of you. What you don't want to have happen is you don't want the melanoma to grow into your dermis, where you have the vasculature, where it could actually metastasize and go to your lymph nodes, or go to your brain, or go to your lungs, or go to your liver. That's what kills you, not the melanoma, but when it metastasizes and goes through your body. So step one is you got to think of melanoma like a hand grenade. You got to treat it with a level of urgency, and you got to get it off you. If you do that, then you have almost 100% cure rate. So that's number one. The second thing is, in Australia, about 2 years ago, they did a study. They looked at 100 people coming in with melanoma, and the day they came in and were diagnosed, they pulled blood samples and they looked at their 25-hydroxy vitamin D levels. And what they found was if your 25-hydroxy vitamin D levels are low, in this case, below 20 nanograms per milliliter, or if you're in Europe or Australia, they might measure it as nanomoles per liter. And in that case, if you're below 50 nanomoles per liter or 20 nanograms per milliliter, then your chance of having a thicker melanoma, the ones that are less survivable, went up by 300 to 400%. So I don't know if a lot of people know this, but as you move further away from the equator, your risk of probably a dozen different cancers go up dramatically. And the reason for that is because you make vitamin D in your skin photochemically. I guess I should have rolled up my sleeves so I could make some. But you make it in your skin photochemically. There's a molecule in your skin called 6-dehydrocholesterol, and a UVB photon comes in, breaks the ring. There's a rearrangement, and it makes a vitamin D precursor that then dissolves into your bloodstream. It goes to your liver. It's changed a couple of times, but that's how you make vitamin D. You make it from the sun. Now, the scary part is that's also how you damage your DNA to create cancers. So it's not one of these things that says ultraviolet is evil or ultraviolet is good. It's all a matter of the dose. So you want to get a little bit of sunshine every day, but not enough to get sunburns. So just a little bit of sun. Some people need 5 minutes. Some people need 20 minutes. But and you actually, it's midday is when the sun is most effective at producing the vitamin D. Another thing which is interesting is that sunscreens are very good at preventing sunburn, but they're extremely good at blocking vitamin D. So all sunscreens block those wavelengths between 290 and 320 nanometers that your body needs to make vitamin D, and they do that extremely well. So you really want to get out and get a little bit of sun. So let me make it real practical. When I go to the beach with my 6-year-old and my 7-year-old, when we get there, I let them get full spectrum sun for 5 to 7 minutes before I put any sunscreen on them. I want them to make a little vitamin D. I just don't want them to roast the whole afternoon and get sunburned. So a little bit of ultraviolet is extremely helpful, but a lot of ultraviolet will kill you. And real quickly, what happens is a UV photon comes into your DNA. You have a couple of base pairs that are next to each other. It actually makes a 4-membered ring and makes a dimer. It's called a cyclobutane pyrimidine dimer. And that defect that is created by the ultraviolet is actually what, if it's not repaired by your body, that's what will produce a skin cancer later. In fact, those are the signature mutations. Chris has a good question. What about tanning beds? The bad news is that tanning beds produce a very high dose. Most tanning beds, different tanning beds have different output, but most tanning beds have less UVB and more UVA. So you get less sunburn, which is a positive. But the downside is that if you look at the work that's come out of Yale in the last 2 years, or the work that was done by Dr. Anthony Young in London back in 2011, UVA1, those longer wavelength UVA photons, actually can create those same cyclobutane pyrimidine dimers. And I think they are implicated in melanoma. There's some data that says that people that use tanning beds significantly can increase their chances of melanoma by about 75%. And it's also particularly bad if you're doing it when you're young. So what's interesting with melanoma is it seems that intermittent sun exposure, especially where you get an intense sunburn, that seems to be the culprit in terms of melanoma. Now, here's the good news for your body. Even though you've created those kinks in your DNA from the UV photons, your body has this really exceptional repair system that finds those problems in your DNA and actually goes in and clips out that dimer and replaces it with the correct base pairs, and so it repairs your DNA so you don't get cancer. Um, there's a very small fraction of the population that doesn't have that repair mechanism working, and they have a condition that's called XP, xeroderma pigmentosa. And unfortunately, if you have XP, nearly all the children that have XP, they pass away before they're 10 years old from skin cancer because they don't have that ability to go fix the defects that were introduced into their DNA by the UV photons. Sorry, I got a little misty-eyed there. I remembered back in 1990, I was working on sunscreens, and I went in the fitness center. I was going to do a quick workout. I saw a copy of People magazine, which is something I didn't normally read. But the cover had the picture of these two little girls, and it said, they can only play at night, or, children of the dark, or something like that. And both those little girls had that genetic condition, the XP, the xeroderma pigmentosa. And so, their parents would have to take them out to the park at 10 o'clock at night. They had to, put shutters across the house. It was a really brutal disease. Someone else that I know was actually working on trying to get that repair enzyme and deliver it to those kinds of kids so that they would have a more normal life. I haven't followed his work lately, so I don't know if they had success or not. Hey, I love when you guys have questions, so please fire those up, and I think that's great. So if I was going to summarize, what I'd say is, number one, you have to look at melanoma like it's a hand grenade and the pin is pulled. Because as it grows, what happens is if you let it keep going and you let it grow into your dermis, where you have all the blood vessels and so on, that's when some of the cells can leave. They can end up in your lymph nodes. They can end up in your organs, and that's something you do not want to have happen. Number two, you want to optimize your vitamin D levels. When you go to the doctor, there's a box that they can check on the blood test. It says 25 OH vitamin D, which stands for 25 hydroxy vitamin D. Try to strongly encourage them to check that box. The normal range is 30 to 100 nanograms per milliliter. Most Americans are in the 20s. A lot of Americans are below 20 and in the teens. And the lower you go, the more colds and flu you get, the more susceptible you are to probably 10 or 12 different cancers. And there's probably 4,000 different biochemical processes that happen in your body that depend on vitamin D. In fact, I would say that vitamin D is actually not a vitamin, but it's a hormone. If you looked at the structure of vitamin D, it would look much closer to testosterone or estrogen or pregnenolone than it would to a normal vitamin. And it's a very powerful molecule. One last thing, if you take vitamin D supplementally, you should also take some vitamin K2, because vitamin D will bring up the concentration of calcium in your blood, and you do not want to calcify your arteries. K2 actually activates the calcium transport proteins in your blood and gets the calcium out of your blood and gets it to the teeth and the bones, which is what you want. I'd say another question, do sunless tanners give you protection from melanoma? And the answer is, unfortunately, they do not. So sunless tanners are those products you can use. They normally have something in them called dihydroxyacetone. DHA, dihydroxyacetone, actually reacts with some of the proteins in your skin. And it produces a chromophore, so it looks like you're tan, but they don't provide protection against melanoma. I don't have the statistics about if you've had one melanoma removed, but what I would do is I would make sure that my vitamin D levels were at least 40 nanograms per milliliter, because you have normal defense mechanisms in your body that are activated by having the correct amount of vitamin D. I would also, and I forgot to mention this, sunscreens are really good at blocking the wavelengths of light that produce sunburn. So those are the wavelengths between 290 and 340 nanometers. Unfortunately, sunscreens, particularly the sunscreens in the United States, are not very good at blocking the longer wavelength UVA. And now that we've seen the work that came out of Yale about 2 years ago, those longer wavelength photons, what they do in the skin is they actually produce oxygen and nitrogen free radicals. And when those free radicals are present and you have melanin present, they actually excite an electron in the melanin, which then damages the DNA and gives you that cyclobutane pyrimidine dimer again. So sunscreens are not enough. A t-shirt gives you equal protection across the ultraviolet. A sunscreen generally gives you a lot of protection against sunburn and minimal protection against UVA. And unfortunately, in the United States, we have many fewer sunscreen active ingredients available. So if you go to Brazil, if you go across Europe, if you go to Japan, or you go to Australia, their sunscreen products are substantially better, not because their formulators are better, but because they have access to active ingredients and they can use those legally. I think you're going to find in the next 18 months the U.S. Food and Drug Administration will approve several new active ingredients. So I'm hoping that when I talk to you in 2 years from now, the sunscreens on the U.S. market will no longer be deficient versus those that you can buy in Australia or France or Germany or Britain or Japan or Brazil or dozens of other countries. So Carrie, I don't know if I don't really have a direct answer on recurrence. It's not just sun exposure. You also it ties back to how your skin tends to freckle. It ties back to your family history and so on. But I think there are some things that you can do to minimize the formation, minimize the damage to your DNA, which triggers it, and also to maximize the body's defense mechanisms. So if something is happening, your body has a chance to shut it down. I'm going to pause for a second, take a breath. Any other questions that you guys would like to throw out there? Doesn't have to be on this subject. My focus in life right now is to take what I know about the science of health and then I spend a lot of time reading on PubMed, and I want to try to translate that for normal people, meaning non-scientists. I want to try to take it and simplify it, and then so that my friends, my family, all the people that I interact with live long and healthy lives. And I think a lot of times if your only source of information is TV and magazines, a lot of what you read is not accurate, or it was accurate, 10 years ago or 12 years ago. It's like going to the Verizon store and they're showing you a Motorola StarTAC and they're saying, check out this great phone. And I look at it and I think, yeah, in 1995, that was the state of the art. But, when you look at what's happened in the last 15 or 20 years, it's crazy to make that recommendation now. And the same is true in health. I'll give another 15 seconds if anyone has any other questions, and I really appreciate you guys tuning in. I'm going to, well, first of all, thanks for tuning in, and I'm going to be signing off. Hope you'll join me again in the future, and I appreciate your support. Thank you so much. Take care.